You're listening to The Hard Truth with John Deaton. John Deaton is a Marine veteran, lawyer, and best-selling author who stared down poverty, survived street violence, and beat cancer to fight another day. From the streets to the courtroom, Deaton has taken on corporate greed and fought against government fraud and overreach. Always for the little guy, a proud father of 3 girls, Deaton brings you the raw, unfiltered truth that hits hard and holds nothing back. Join us as we dive into his journey, his vision, and what he hopes to bring to the people of Massachusetts.
Don't touch that dial, change the channel, because it's Sunday at 7 p.m. and you're listening to The Hard Truth with John Deaton on WRKO 680 AM. Good evening, everyone. Hope everyone had a great week. Remember, you can write me at john@hardtruthshow.com, john@hardtruthshow.com. You can follow me on X at John E. Deaton, the number 1. First thing I want to do, I'm going to start reading messages probably again next week. Get to some of the emails that have come in, some of the comments, but I do want to say thank you to all the people that gave heartfelt condolences for the passing of my younger sister. It means a lot to me. I appreciate you, and thank you. Now, interesting development this week. Just recently, one of our U.S. senators happens to be the person that I ran against last year, Elizabeth Warren, was in New York City. And, you know, the one thing that I pointed out about Senator Warren, and this applies equally to Ed Markey as well, is that you really never see them in Massachusetts. You don't see them talking to the people here. Elizabeth Warren, you know, she's on the Sunday shows and she's flying around the country and doing her thing, but not here in Massachusetts. Well, Senator Warren was busy because she has taken an aggressive position related to the mayor's race, not in Boston now, but in New York City. And a lot of you know that Mandami, who is a proud Democratic socialist, won the Democratic primary in record numbers. He's someone who has publicly stated that he rejects capitalism. He is a democratic socialist. He wants to, and I'm not paraphrasing, I'm telling you his words, he wants to control and seize the means of production. He wants to run basically grocery stores all throughout New York City. He wants the government in control, wants to absolutely, in his words, abolish private property rights and go to where the government provides the housing for people, tells us how to live. Obviously, he's extremely left. Some would say more of a communist than a socialist. I've actually talked about Mandami and his popularity on my message, because I've been saying to people, the wealth gap in this country, as many of you know, we've got to attack it. We've got to implement some change. We've been practicing corporate capitalism, or I should say corporate socialism, where we bail out all of these corporations, but not small business owners, not individual owners. And this wealth gap that's increasing, people are not being able to participate in the American dream. They can't afford a house. When you can't afford to live, you're going to look for someone who is giving you solutions. And if someone comes along who's a handsome fella and is articulate and has good energy like Mandami has, a very talented individual, he's going to gain popularity because he's saying to people, I'll get your groceries down and the government will be the solution to all your problems. Now, anybody that's really been alive long enough knows that when the government comes to you and says that they're going to solve your problems, that's never going to happen. That's not good news. But I understand the attraction. Well, Elizabeth Warren has went all in on Mandami. She's even said that really his message is the Democratic message. Now, she basically says that it's about affordability. leave it to a politician like her and Ed Markey, who's been in office for 50 years, talk about this bad system we have when they're part of that system, that broken system that they have voted on, that they've helped implement. Now they're reformers of the system that they created. It's insanity. But I want to play Senator Warren. She was on CNBC, and I want you to listen to
Speaking in behalf of him to a certain extent. I wonder, though, often we see this, and this is a local election. New York does not operate in a vacuum. It competes with other cities. And so this idea of somehow raising taxes on the wealthiest New Yorkers, who, by the way, I would point out, pay roughly 15% of their income right now between city and state, raising taxes on them will simply drive them away. Shouldn't the focus of a mayor be on delivering services to the constituents of the city and doing that by raising the most revenue as possible without chasing businesses and the high-income taxpayers out of the city? Because they can go to Austin, they can go to Dallas, they can go to Atlanta, they can go to Nashville. This is your issue. It's a national issue, not a local issue.
The issue is affordability. Do you know how many working families are chased out of New York City every day because they can't afford housing, they can't afford groceries, they can't afford child care? What Zoran is saying is, I want people to be able to afford to live in New York City. That's what keeps it a vibrant city. That's what makes people want to live
Nobody
here.
disagrees with that, Senator, but raising taxes in order to do
Let's stop for a second. Now, isn't it interesting that Elizabeth Warren is talking about the lack of affordability in New York City? What about Massachusetts? What about people that have been living here all their lives, that were born here, that are now being chased out because they can't afford rent, because they can't afford a home? They don't have $100,000 or $200,000 to put on a down payment. And even if they did, at the current interest rates, they wouldn't be able to afford a mortgage anyways, or they can't afford the $4,000 a month in rent, plus the groceries. Guess what? Plus the electric bills. We have a 72% higher increase than the rest of the country on the electric bills that we have here in Massachusetts. All because of that. But it enrages me when I listen to Senator Warren sit there and talk about the conditions of New York City. Maybe if she came to Boston, maybe if she came to Worcester, maybe if she was in Springfield and other places, she would understand that those challenges are here, not just in New York. And the solution isn't socialism. But let's continue with this this conversation that your senator, your senior senator from Massachusetts, wants to talk about so passionately about New York City.
Sir.
Oh, dear. Are you worried that billionaires are going to go hungry?
No, I'm worried that they're going to leave and spend their money elsewhere.
You know, they've threatened to do that over and over and over.
And they have. They've left.
But here's the thing.
And Goldman Sachs, when they create new jobs, they do it in Dallas. And Blackstone won't build a new headquarters. And go on and on.
You want to have a workable city? You want to have a city that's vibrant? You want to have a city where the streets are full, where there are things for sale 24 hours a day? Then you need people who can live here and work here.
Well, we've got that right now, by the way. I would point out New York is thriving. So now it's doing pretty well, actually.
I'm glad you think they're doing well, because a lot of people are struggling to pay for housing. A lot of people are struggling to pay for groceries. And I got to tell you, mamas and daddies who are facing $25,000 a year to pay.
All right, I can't take it anymore. I can't listen to her. You notice that the host is saying what we're seeing here in Massachusetts, an exodus of people leaving Massachusetts because it's not affordable. So everything she's saying about New Yorkers, I wish she had that kind of passion as it applied to Bay Staters, okay? And so, but we, a lot of people are out there with Mondami and they're calling them names. And I'm saying we have to offer younger people a piece of opportunity. We have to offer them a piece of the American dream. If they feel that they have priced out, if there's just no way, no matter how many jobs they have or no matter how hard they work, that they're never going to be afford a home. We've got to attack that at the root problem. Otherwise, they're going to turn to socialism We know it's not going to work, but that's what they're going to turn to. And we've got to be careful because what's happening in New York City with the popularity of this guy can happen in Boston as well. I mean, Mayor Wu has absolutely been a disaster, but you can see that people are struggling and they're going to turn to charismatic leaders, even if their message is as deeply flawed as Mandami's. Okay, now, another U.S. Senator in Massachusetts, as you know, is Ed Markey. And Ed Markey has been in office for 50 years. Okay, when I say in office, I mean he's been in Washington, D.C. for 50 years. The average voter in Massachusetts is 40 years old. You understand that? This guy has been in the Washington bubble for more than a decade, longer than the average voter lives and is living here in Massachusetts and voting. It's insane. And so just to give you a couple statistics about Ed Markey, because these senators, when they go on TV and they start talking about how they need to reform a system that they implemented, it is just enraging to me. Fenway tickets, when Ed Markey first went to Washington, D.C. as a congressman, was $1.25 at Fenway. Okay, $1.25. College tuition, we're talking about $1,500. It's insane that's how dated this guy is. And when we come back from the break, we're going to talk more about Ed Markey. And I'm hoping that somebody will step up and take this guy on, because I think the race is winnable. Some of you know I've been thinking about it. It's a big decision. I don't know what I'm going to do. But if it's not me, it has to be somebody. So when we come from this first break, we're going to dig into it more. And I'm also going to highlight some more Trump wins and some more challenges. We're going to give you an update on the things that happened all week. Stay tuned to The Hard Truth. I'm John Deaton. I appreciate you. Please come back from the break. Welcome back to The Hard Truth. You're listening to me, John Deaton. I appreciate you. Before we continue talking about the junior senator, and I say that with laughter because Ed Markey is 80 years old and he's been there 50 years, but Senator Warren got to the Senate before him, so she's considered the senior senator from Massachusetts. But, we're seeing not just a rise in anti-Semitism across the country, but we're seeing, I believe, for the first time, some real breaks in potentially Israel's support here in America. And I think that Israel is going to need to address it. And I just want to go over some statistics, okay? Because I've been being asked on interviews about my position with Israel and Gaza. And as many of you know that followed me, I talked about October 7th being an act of genocide where these men, women, children, they were raped, they were burned, babies' heads were decapitated. It was an absolute act of war. And I said that, it's impossible to have peace with an enemy who wants to kill you and wants the total destruction of your country and of your existence. And so I have been a supporter of Israel, but I do want to go over some numbers because I think that Benjamin Netanyahu is starting to become someone that needs to be replaced. I think we need fresh leadership in that relationship between America and the United States, because right now the statistics are 38,000 people are dead in Gaza. 14,000 of them have been children. More than 10,000 of them are women. 62% of all the deaths in Gaza are women and children, 62%, and the vast large majority of them are civilians. So what's happening in Gaza is not just a conflict, and it's not just a humanitarian crisis, it is a humanitarian catastrophe. Tens of thousands of people are dead, many of them children. The infrastructure in Gaza is ruined, and the world is watching in this almost like slow motion, okay? And the reason I say there's a bit of a break is because President Trump just recently on Air Force One said that he and the First Lady were very troubled by the pictures of kids starving in Gaza. And I'm quoting President Trump where he said, quote, "We have to get aid to these children, to these people who are starving. And there's increasing cause worldwide for a ceasefire and for a Palestinian statehood." Okay, so let me make it clear. October 7th was an attack by Hamas. Israel had the right to decisively defend itself, but you can't starve children in the name of defense. And there are cases. Now, listen, I'm not someone who falls for propaganda from Hamas or any of that, but when you see President Trump softening and you see President Trump saying, listen, something aid's got to get there, I think that Israel needs to be very careful how they proceed, because at some point, if you lose the majority of the American people in support, it's going to impact the relationship. And so just my thoughts on that as we saw some horrific pictures this last week. Now, let's get back to the topic I was talking about during the break, which was, of course, Ed Markey. And let's look at this guy from a lens of history, at some of the, just how disconnected that he is from Massachusetts. All right, Markey's been in Washington since 1976, 50 years as a congressman and a senator. So back when he was in his 30s, strutting into Congress at the age of 30, the world was a very different place, okay? And so were the challenges that people faced. All right, I'm going to show you how his half a century tenure leaves him out of sync with Massachusetts voters and the realities we face in 2025. All right, now I've already told you that there's a big difference with the voters. The average age of voters is roughly 46 based on recent data. All right, with a hefty chunk over 30% under 35. Okay, now these folks are grappling with student debt that's averaging $43,000 per borrower. Rents in Boston eating up 40% of the median income. So basically, you got to pay 40 to 50% of your net in rent. And then you have the student loans. Okay, you have childcare costs hitting $20,000 a year for one kid. Now let's compare that to the 70s when Markey was 30-something pushing policies as a state rep in Malden. All right, back then inflation was not like it was today because wages kept in pace with inflation much better than they are today. All right, Boston rent when Markey first went to Washington was under $200 a month. Imagine that, $200 a month. That's less than a quarter of today's $3,000. A college degree cost about $1,500 a year at a public university, not the $30,000 to $40,000 that we see today. Okay. Now, I understand that when Markey, he's going to play his, ice cream truck commercials, and he's going to hang on to the things that people think make him relatable. And I want to ask you, is he relatable today? And I got to tell you, whoever takes on Markey, I hope they don't let him off the hook on his disgraceful record when it comes to race. All right? Listen, this guy, last time he ran in a primary against Joe Kennedy, I remember watching it, and I remember vomiting in my mouth because I watched him, Ed Markey, and Joe Kennedy argue over who was more pro Black Lives Matter. And these two white men of privilege, as they said, that they owed African Americans, this whole generation of them, that they're sorry. And Ed Markey talked about how he wants reparations for African Americans. Imagine that. So I always tell you when you listen to this show that you never pay attention to what they say, and you pay attention to what they do. So Ed Markey claims that he believes in reparations for African Americans. Do you want to know what the first act of reparations were in this country? It's in when federal judges ordered desegregation, and so that there was busing of black kids to white kids' school. So remember, this guy who's on stage saying he's Mr. Pro Black Lives Matter, okay, what did he do? He actually offered legislation that would stop the desegregation. He wanted to stop the busing. So you see, he's for black kids, just not in his neighborhood. He's for the black kids, just not in the schools in his neighborhood. That's who Ed Markey was back then in the 70s. And then 2 years later, he tried to stop more of the desegregation. That's what he did. And he hasn't answered that till today. Now he gets up and he says all the things that he's doing for people of color. And he wants to reform the criminal justice system. You'll hear him say that. Remember, he was going to reform the criminal justice system. He voted the 1994 Crime Act into law that incarcerated disproportionately men and women of color. Right? And now he's on stage saying to people that he wants to reform the law that he implemented. Now, when you reach that level where you've been in office so long that you're reforming policies that you voted in 30 years ago, it's time for somebody else to step up to the plate. All right, that's one example. And there's so many other examples that we could go over, but that's just on the racial issue. I mean, remember, Ed Markey gets on stage and he says that he was so proud, absolutely proud, that Rachel Rollins supported him, endorsed him. He stood on stage and he said Rachel Rollins was the embodiment of racial justice in this country, and he supported her and he was so proud of her. Well, whoever runs against Markey, I hope they ask him, are you still proud? Because she resigned in disgrace, absolute disgrace. And the only reason that he said all that positive stuff is because he was using her as a token. She's a black woman, and she supports him, and she's going to be a U.S. attorney and the DA and all this, and he just rushes. It's not about merit. It's not about character. That is the most phony, baloney kind of support that people of color don't want that. And I hope whoever runs against Markey can show them that this guy is the kind of white liberal that Malcolm X warned people about. So that's who you have to worry about. Stay tuned. We'll come back after the break. Welcome back to The Hard Truth. You're listening to John Deaton on iHeart's WRKO 680 AM. Remember, write me at john@hardtruthshow.com, john@hardtruthshow.com. Okay, I'm going to get off our senators. You know, I ran for Senate last year, And when I see them out there and making these insane statements, ignoring Massachusetts, I mean, listen, even in 2014, the Boston Globe pointed out that Ed Markey's water bill is the absolute minimum every year because he's never here. He's never in Malden. He lives in Chevy Chase, Maryland. And, so I'll just move on because I don't want to spend this entire show talking about our two U.S. senators. I'm going to leave it up to whoever runs against these guys. And I hope they bring the fire. I hope they bring the juice. I'll tell you. Now, another big thing that happened this week or in the last few weeks was a big decision from the United States Supreme Court related to birthright citizenship. And this is going to be an issue. And I'm sure it's going to be a debated issue all across the country, including during the midterms. The United States Supreme Court, in a 6-3 ruling, they denied an executive order on an automatic citizenship to children born here, okay, on temporary visas. But it wasn't on the substantive issue of whether or not President Trump's executive order can eliminate, that he can void out birthright citizenship. Now, what I mean by that is obviously if you're born in America, on American soil, you are a United States citizen by birth. Does not matter whether your parents are or are not, okay? And so Trump, because he wanted to eliminate the anchor babies, if you will, people who were rushing to come here and give birth so that they can take advantage of U.S. citizenship. President Trump wants to eliminate that. And so he issued an executive order. And what happened is a district judge, Massachusetts, for example, is one of them, could be Rhode Island, could be any other state, a district judge issued a nationwide injunction saying to President Trump, you can't do that. And we've seen this happen in immigration with the deportations, where a judge in district court picked by, say, Obama or Biden, where someone will rush to that judge and say, look, this is unconstitutional, this executive order of Trump's. And then that judge sitting could be Rhode Island, the smallest state in the country, then issues an injunction that stops Trump from implementing the policy. Now, this has happened no matter who's the president. Joe Biden, remember, was stopped by a judge nationwide when he was trying to do the student loan forgiveness program. And someone challenged it, and a judge issued a nationwide injunction. And so this is a big win for the executive power, and I think it's right. But understand, don't get confused. The Supreme Court didn't rule on whether Trump's executive order denying birthright citizenship is constitutional or not. But they gave him this win, this big procedural win, saying that a district court judge can't enjoin the president. It would basically nullify an election, right? The president has a lot of deference on immigration, foreign policy, and a single district judge sitting in Massachusetts or Rhode Island shouldn't be able to prevent people in Texas and Florida. And so the Supreme Court 6-3 said that a injunction has to be limited to the district in which that court exists. So as it pertains to Massachusetts, or as it pertains to Rhode Island, or the people just in that case. And so Trump's executive order was being implemented in effect in 28 other states. And so some states who challenged it, it's not going forward. The executive order has been stopped, but in states that have not challenged it, red states, then people are being denied, pursuant to that executive order, birthright citizenship. Now, they're all going to be challenged, okay? And what we got to do is we've got to, do a little quick history lesson. And what was the purpose of the the 14th Amendment and birthright citizenship. And what people need to understand is when we go back in time, it was because of the Dred Scott decision. Okay, the Supreme Court and the Dred Scott decision denied citizenship to freed slaves. And these slaves who were born on American soil basically were free, but they were being denied citizenship. And the Supreme Court said that's okay, they can be denied citizenship. And so Congress got together and they passed the 14th Amendment that makes it constitutionally a right to birthright citizenship. And then after that, in 1898, there was a big Supreme Court case called Wong Kim Ark, where a child was born where both mom and dad were Chinese nationals, but the child was born in America, and the Supreme Court in that decision basically said, no, according to the 14th Amendment, it does not matter whether mom or dad is a citizenship. It's only based on the birth. And so, big decision. Now, this back then, you can imagine people weren't imagining an open border where millions of people are coming in and then they're rushing to have a child so that they can basically take advantage of that citizenship. So it's a very controversial decision, and America is one of the only countries that have this birthright citizenship. You have some countries like Australia, they basically say that one parent must be, and also this is the way it is in the UK and other places, that one parent has to be a U.S. citizen or a citizen of that country. And if one parent is, and then you're born there, then that's a nexus. But when, both parents are illegals and that illegal who's here illegally has a child here, then should that person be afforded the protection of the U.S. citizenship? And the answer is, from John Deaton's perspective, is yes, because it's written in the Constitution. And I'm not going to get into the argument that the Trump administration is trying to make and say, well, there's the subject to language, that these people are not subject to the America and putting America first, so therefore you can deny it. Listen, the Supreme Court affirmed it in 1898. I'm a strict constructionist sometimes. If it says that that's the way it is, then we need to change it. Congress needs to do their job and pass a new legislation that is a constitutional amendment, whatever it's going to take to basically change it. Absent that, I think you have to follow the Constitution. And that's why I believe in zero tolerance for illegal immigration. That's why I believe and I celebrate and I give President Trump credit for 93% of illegal crossings being down in this country because of things like birthright citizenship, because of health care, because of the infrastructure and all the things that we've talked about so many times on this show. Okay? Now, one thing I want to comment is the Supreme Court justices. Unfortunately, Supreme Court justices have become so political, and it applies to both sides. Sotomayor said that this decision that Amy Coney Barrett is a travesty for the rule of law. And then you have this decision by Jackson, when she wrote her dissent, she said the Supreme Court's decision 6-3 is an existential threat to the rule of law. And Kagan joined in all of that stuff, but you want to know what Kagan said last time? When Biden was stopped with that federal district decision and was enjoined from granting student loan relief, Kagan said shame on that district judge and that something needed to be done, that a district judge should not have the power to overrule the president. But now, and she said that because she agreed with the underlying policy of student loan forgiveness. But now she is in the 3 dissenters. She says, oh, it's a different story. And it's all because she doesn't favor this underlying policy. And so shame on her to have that kind of blatant inconsistency. Listen, we have to have faith in our courts. We've lost faith in the agencies, whether it's the CIA or the FBI or the Department of Education or the Environmental Protection Agency or the Securities Exchange Commission. All these agencies have become politically hijacked by hacks. And we've got to have the courts. We are a nation of laws. We've got to have the Supreme Court, the supreme law of the land, have some consistency. And for Kagan to have that kind of blatant inconsistency, I say shame on her. Listen, you listen to The Hard Truth. I'm John Deaton. You can reach the show at john@hardtruthshow.com. john@hardtruthshow.com. Follow me on X, the Deaton Law Firm, if you have an asbestos-related injury, and you can read my book called Food Stamp Warrior. Coming back from the break. All right, welcome back to The Hard Truth, our last segment for the evening. Please email me at john@hardtruthshow.com. I want to hear what you have to say. I want you to tell me if I'm being too hard on Ed Markey or Elizabeth Warren. Tell me if you think this year we can actually get a seat at the table in the midterms. Share any thoughts that you're having out there. Anything I say. Matter of fact, I want to bring some of you on the show, ordinary citizens, like you said, highlight people and what they're doing, things that they're achieving. I've already had several people on the show. And also, if you want to just come and let's have some civil debate. If you disagree with me, if you feel adamant about something, let's have a conversation. We got to get back to talking to each other and not hating each other. We got to get back to listening to what the other person feels. Half this country is divided from the other half. I mean, that's reality. No matter what you feel about Kamala Harris, tens of millions of people voted for Kamala Harris because they don't like President Trump or disagree with President Trump. And tens of millions of Americans voted for President Trump despite everything that you could say and that they did say about President Trump. We live in a very, very divided world. And if we don't start listening to each other, I have genuine fear about our country. I really do, because I believe this toxic division is one of the single biggest threats that we have. Okay, another threat that we have that you've heard me talk about is this wealth gap. Listen, I know what poverty does, man. And when I was on Fox Business with Charles Payne, he was interviewing me about my book and about my life story of overcoming extreme poverty. And he asked me, he said, give me some of the reasons you think that you were able to escape poverty, John. Like, you're successful now, you know. I'm a millionaire. I put $1 million in my own money to run against Elizabeth Warren, knowing the odds. I've worked my butt off to get in the position that I'm in to do that. But I am the American dream. My life is the American dream. And I said that in part it was because of hatred of poverty and what it does to people, strips them of their dignity. You know, my mother told me at one point in time when I was a high school dropout and I was devastated and crying because I couldn't find a high school. And I had been Everyone in my family was a high school dropout, every single one. All 4 older brothers and sisters, high school dropouts. First cousins, high school dropouts. And I was a high school dropout after 3 months, and I'm devastated. My mother was trying to console me. And she put her arms around me and she said, "Son, why are you so upset?" And I said, "Mom, I want to go to college. I have to graduate high school, and I can't find a high school." And I was crying. I was devastated. And my poor, beautiful mother, who's my hero, put her arms around me and she said, "John, I'm sorry. I really am, son. But college isn't for people like us." That's what poverty did to my mother. Stripped her of her self-esteem. That college was this just for different class of people. We were white trash living in the hood. That was our destiny. And we're on food stamps and welfare, and we're struggling. And there's days we don't eat. That's our life. Not, oh, you're going to go to college and you're going to become a lawyer. And so that hatred of watching my beautiful mother lose some of her dignity and self-esteem because of poverty, it made me hate poverty. And I wanted to escape, and I would do anything to get out of that life, and to provide for my children a life that I could never dream of. That's what motivated me. And this wealth gap that we have, I got in the race last year, everybody, because in part, I question, is the American dream dying? Is it dead? Could I do what I did back then, all those years ago, today? Or has it been so priced out that people can't afford, the things Elizabeth Warren was saying about New York? People can't afford a home, people can't afford rent, people can't afford groceries. Do poor people have no shot? And it's this wealth gap. And, I'll give you an idea that's going to surprise some of you. Did you know that billionaires are the fastest growing wealth group? And it's not even close. According to Forbes, in 2025, there's 902 billionaires. It's a record high. It's the highest of any country across the land. In the United States, we have 902 billionaires. And there's about 3,000 billionaires worldwide. And almost a third of them are in the United States. Fastest growing group by wealth, especially when you compare them to the middle class and working class. So to give you an idea, in 2020, there were 614 billionaires. 5 years later, there's 902. That's a 47% increase in 5 short years. Also, in 2020, the United States, 614 billionaires had a cumulative worth of $3 trillion. 5 years later, that $3 trillion is now $6.8 trillion. More than doubled in 5 years. So 47% increase in the number of billionaires and more than doubling in what their net worth is. And that's with inflation during a pandemic. That's an average annual growth rate, everyone, of 14%. That outpaces the stock market and certainly wage growth. And when you look at the middle class, wealth has grown much slower, with wages only rising 1% to 2% annually. But that 1% to 2% is being eroded because inflation is so high. So wages are not keeping up with inflation. Inflation is a tax. And so you're actually seeing the middle class shrink while the super wealthy expand. Just to give you some more statistics of what I'm talking about and why I say it's such a threat to our system, our government, our way of life here in America, the middle class now makes up a smaller share of the U.S. population than it did in 1971. Okay? In 1971, the middle class represented 61% of the U.S. population. More than 6 out of 10 were in the middle class. Today, it's around 49.9. So let's say 50%. So 50%, half. So the middle class has lost relative wealth share and purchasing power because they've printed so many dollars, trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars, that your dollar is less valuable. The dollar has lost 95% of its value. Okay, in the last, since 2000, since 2020, it's lost 30% in 5 years. So your purchasing power is a lot less. And why have the billionaires grown so fast? It's because it's based on asset base. What I've been saying is the way you expand wealth and build wealth in this country is by owning things. You own stocks, you own bonds, you own real estate, you own Bitcoin or crypto. If you own those hard assets, that's what's appreciated. Well, poor people don't own things. The working class, they own their home most of the time, but they have a mortgage on it. So these hard assets, they appreciate rapidly and often in a compounded tax-free way for a lot of these rich people. And the tax code rewards that. And so if you don't own things and you're just based on your wages, asset prices skyrocket, real estate skyrockets, Amazon's, NVIDIA, Meta, Apple, Facebook, all of these companies are trillion-dollar companies now. So all of the corporations have grown. All of the stock has went up. Look at the stock markets at an all-time high. And so the wealth has been tied to those asset prices. Well, guess what? People like Ed Markey and Elizabeth Warren, they favor things like the accredited investor rule that says you can't own private equity unless you make $300,000 a year for 3 years straight, and you're worth $1 million, not counting your home. Well, you just excluded 87% of the American population from having one form of hard asset prices, hard assets that will increase in price. So if you exclude everyone from owning those things, they're not going to participate in wealth building. And we've got to get appreciable assets in the hands of more ordinary people. That's how you attack it. That's how I've built my wealth. I owned Apple stock. I owned real estate. I owned Bitcoin and crypto. And so that's just one way we attack it. So listen, we're going to spend a lot of time on the wealth gap because I think it's an absolute threat. But I want everybody to have a great week. I'll be back next week. This is The Hard Truth with John Deaton. God bless you.
You're listening to The Hard Truth with John Deaton. John Deaton is a Marine veteran, lawyer, and best-selling author who stared down poverty, survived street violence, and beat cancer to fight another day. From the streets to the courtroom, Deaton has taken on corporate greed and fought against government fraud and overreach. Always for the little guy, a proud father of 3 girls, Deaton brings you the raw, unfiltered truth that hits hard and holds nothing back. Join us as we dive into his journey, his vision, and what he hopes to bring to the people of Massachusetts.